From the left, I'm Bill Scher.
And from the right, I'm Matt Lewis.
And you're watching
The Weekend Blog. On this week's episode, we're going to look at Harry Reid, whom some are calling weak, Western CPAC, where all heck broke loose in Orange County, and the book SuperFreakonomics. But first, Bill, New York 23, an interesting week. As you probably know, we have three candidates running. There's the liberal Republican endorsed Dede Scozzafava. We've got a Conservative Party candidate running against her, and we have a Democrat running for that seat as well. Jim Garrity.
This is the seat that Obama plucked a moderate Republican to join his cabinet, correct?
That is right. It's a Republican seat, and Republicans are hoping to keep it. But now we have this issue where they had this sort of backroom deal where party leaders in the area picked Dede Scozzafava, whose name is very hard to pronounce.
And to spell.
And to spell. They picked her, and this has created all sorts of dissension. I mean, this transcends the debate over whether or not Republicans should support northeastern liberal Republicans. This lady is really hardcore left. And so
now, I've seen Michelle Malkin describe her as a radical leftist.
Yes.
Can you explain what makes her even more egregious to conservatives than the average moderate Northeast Rockefeller Republican?
Yeah, I mean, one example is she's been supported her entire political career by Acorn. I think her husband works for the AFL-CIO or something like that. I think in the past she has had positions in favor of abortion, higher taxes. I mean, it's essentially, if you go down the list, she essentially should be a liberal Democrat. And for whatever reason, in this district, she's a moderate Republican. But, so this has been a controversial story. Conservatives have essentially lined up on the side of the Conservative Party. Conservative bloggers have lined up generally in support of Doug Hoffman, who's the Conservative Party candidate. As you know, in New York State, there's actually a strong Conservative Party. Bill Buckley's brother, I believe, was elected to the U.S. Senate as a Conservative Party member many years ago in New York. So this week, Newt Gingrich endorsed Scozzafava, the liberal Republican. That drew a lot of consternation from conservatives, including blogger Eric Erickson, who said that Newt Gingrich's 2012 prospects are over, to which I said he has 2012 prospects. But Newt, you had a tweet about that as well, right? Here's my thing with Newt is I think he can do pretty much anything, and conservatives will welcome him back. He'll still speak at CPAC. He'll still go on Hannity. And this will, people will be angry with him for a couple months, and then he'll go on Hannity and do a brilliant performance bashing, healthcare or some Barack Obama liberal idea, and all will be forgiven. Newt Gingrich is such a good communicator. If he
commands that much respect for his long conservative career, why don't conservatives heed his call and say, hey, if Newt's endorsing her, maybe she's not actually a radical leftist?
Well, I mean, this is an interesting thing. If you look, Newt Gingrich, first of all, you can make an argument that he wasn't that conservative as a speaker. Then you got to look at the fact that, Newt Gingrich did a pro-environmental ad with Nancy Pelosi. Newt Gingrich endorsed liberal Republican Wayne Gilchrist for Congress in Maryland over Andy Harris, who was the Club for Growth endorsed candidate and a good conservative in Maryland. So Newt has a long history of doing stuff like this, and it doesn't hurt him. I don't think he has the power to bring along the conservative movement, but he has the ability to give a hell of a speech. He's probably the only ideas guy left or around in the Republican Party. He's clearly brilliant. He's great on TV. And I just think that the reason this is an issue for me, or an interesting thing to talk about for me, is that all this talk that conservatives are having about ousting Gingrich, or this time he's it's a straw that's broken the camel's back. I think he's fine. He's fine in the sense that he's not going to run for office, but he wants to sell books, go on TV, and he'll get a standing ovation at CPAC next year. It doesn't matter. He is this, and supporting Scozzafava should be, if anybody else did it, it's a deal breaker for them. And Newt can get away with this because he's a great communicator, and that sort of transcends everything.
Now, there was another Scozzafava story when a Weekly Standard blogger tried to interview her on the fly, and controversy ensued.
Yes, and Jim Garrity talks about it. And by the way, Garrity had written a piece earlier in the week. It's funny, Jim Garrity seems more offended by Scozzafava slighting a reporter than he was by Scozzafava's liberal record. Earlier in the week, Garrity, who writes at National Review, the campaign spot, had written a piece saying, essentially, I guess we need to just get on board. We don't want to elect a Democrat, It was somewhat conciliatory and somewhat, at least, I don't want to say favorable towards Scozzafava, but as for a conservative blogger, it was pretty good. But then after this whole incident with the reporter, he writes, it's not just the inanity of Dede Scozzafava's campaign calling the cops on a reporter. It's doubling down and calling McCormack a liar. This is the reporter, John McCormack. With audio.
So John McCormack tried to interview her.
Right.
And she called the cops on him?
Yes.
Do we know, is there more to that story than that?
Surprisingly, no. This has been the tape. There's actually a tape of this. And
audio tape or videotape?
It says, with audio tape, now exposing the Scozzafava campaign as the liar, and there's a link.
Is that the Weekly Standard?
This is, let me click on it. This is service you can't get anywhere else here. Let me see if I can click on it. It's Politico.
Okay.
It's a story. It's not actually, they don't have the audio, but they have a transcript of the audio over at Politico. That was the scorecard.
Is there any sense that the Weekly Standard blogger was being harassing in any way?
No, actually not. Surprisingly. Usually when we hear one of these stories, and he was just asking her a question, and then she went crazy. Usually there's more to it than that, but there does not appear to be so. So he says, exposing their campaign as a liar and their account of the candidate's interaction with John McCormack, it's a different ballgame. I'm actually finding myself driven to a position beyond the editors. It's time for the NRCC and RNC to cut their ties and more. It's embarrassing enough when a candidate won't answer reasonable questions from reasonable press, and her campaign attempts to smear them in order to cover up their mess. Forwarding McCormack's emails to Talking Points memo just shows how upside down the Scozzafava campaign is. Bill, she sent emails, or the campaign sent emails to a liberal blog, Talking Points memo, trying to make this reporter, John McCormack, look bad, and actually it backfired. I believe it was Daily Kos and maybe even TPM who put it up and said, we think this makes her look bad, not the reporter.
Very interesting. So is there any sense that this is actually resonating in the district, or is this just sort of a blog flap, but voters in the district don't really care one way or the other?
I don't think voters in the district care about John McCormack, or whether... I think this just sort of is part of the narrative that she is unhinged, and that the campaign is not well run, and that not only is she liberal, but she's kind of a mean person, is what you sort of get from this. It's not helpful. I believe she's now third place in the polls. The Democrat is now in first place. And I was reading a blog somewhere today. Let me see if I can find out what it was called. But I was reading a blog somewhere today that was talking about how this race is more important than the gubernatorial races. Let's see. I was reading The Gaggle. How this race is more important than races in Virginia and New Jersey, because this race is about the conservative movement, in the sense, if Doug Hoffman, the conservative candidate, wins, that's a triumph for conservative. If he wins the general election. If Scozzafava wins, that's not good. But the worst scenario for everybody is if the Democrat wins, because conservatives will be blamed. Conservatives will blame the establishment will blame conservatives. So if the Democrat wins, this could create an even bigger schism than we've already seen. And frankly, we've already seen a pretty big schism, and we'll talk about more of that later in the program.
Well, should we segue to that?
Segue on, Bill.
So there was a conservative conference, the Western CPAC.
Yes.
Which is not officially a CPAC conference. CPAC, the Conservative Political Action Committee, which runs the big annual conservative confab every year. This was a smaller event out in the OC. And I know, Matt, you weren't able to attend yourself, but it seems like there was friction and schisms galore. Does this say anything about a lack of unity in the conservative movement right now?
There's so many things we could talk about here, but one issue that comes to mind right away is the difference between this conference and the one that I went to that was opposite Netroots Nation, which is called the Right Online Conference. And a lot
of little conferences kind of percolating around on the right, it seems.
Yeah, there are. But the Right Online Conference was very well executed. Everybody who went liked it. And the Western CPAC conference was poorly executed. Was
the Western CPAC conference led by, young guard, new media types?
No, it wasn't. I mean, ACU, the American Conservative Union, the group who puts on the regular CPAC, which is huge and very well liked. They're an older organization led by an older movement conservative leader named David Keene, whom we'll talk about in a minute. And I'm not sure exactly what their involvement with Western CPAC is. I think Western CPAC was put on by people who are at least out of touch with the sort of younger part of the movement. Whereas the Right Online Conference, it's a new organization called Americans for Prosperity. Their executive director, Tim Phillips, is like 40 years old or something. A lot of young guys working for them. And let me tell you the thing I loved about the Right Online Conference is they had me, Eric, and I love that, but they had me, Eric Erickson from Red State, and Rob Bluey. That was their new media panel. And, I mean, look, it could have been Ed Morrissey, it could have been Jim Gary, I mean, there could have been other, it doesn't have to be me, but they actually had real bloggers.
You're all three new media conservatives in good standing.
And the thing is, a lot of times they'll have three of us, and then they'll throw on John Fahn or Kellyanne Conway. And those are all great people, but they're not new media people. And they're fascinating to listen to, but not on a new media panel. And so what I liked about the AFP conference, there were many things I liked about it, but they actually gave us that panel, which was on C-SPAN like 100 times that weekend. And they actually had bloggers talk about blogging and new media people talk about new media. So this did not happen, though, at Western CPAC. Read a couple quick posts here. Ed Morrissey says, the nadir, the low point of the conference for myself personally, as well as some of my colleagues on Blogger Row, was that the panel that featured many of us on the impact of new media, the inclusion of one panelist, unknown to any of us, had some of us stumped. It turned out to be a sponsor who apparently demanded time on the panel, even though he runs a fax-blasting service. He proceeded to call me rude for expressing my opinion on this blog of the presentation of impeachment for criticizing my host, which proved an immediate buzzkiller for an audience that had just built energy from Stephen Cruiser's hilarious take on how easy it is to get on Twitter, yada, yada, yada. We have Melissa Clouth here who was there. She says, elections will not be won if the funders do what they've always done. Elections will not be won if new media activists are treated contemptuously and dismissed. And then Stephen Cruiser writes about the conference, after insulting the most prominent blogger there, meaning Ed Morrissey of Hot Air, and pissing all over the reason for the panel, Carmouche. Carmouche is the guy who runs this fax blasting company. I think they're called Grass Tops USA. Carmouche then gave everyone a lecture about avoiding the infighting that has plagued the right for so long. Planet Cruiser fans can probably figure out who my tool of the week is going to be next Friday. So why was he there? I'll go out on a limb and say that he may have made a donation. So basically, they put a guy on this new media panel who doesn't like Twitter or Facebook. He actually gave a talk saying that they're not good, that you should be blast faxing. Unbelievable.
That would seem to be a bit of a conflict of interest.
Yeah. Now, and here's the thing, though. I mean, it is understandable, and almost everybody does this. If CPAC does this, and I don't see a problem with it. I mean, if Heritage Foundation donates $1,000 or $10,000 to put on CPAC, because it costs money to put these conferences on. Then Ed Fulner from CPAC gets some tables at the dinner, and somebody from Heritage gets to speak. And that's sort of how it's done. But and I don't think that's an ethical problem at all. I think that everyone probably does that. But the problem is when you take people who don't have the credibility and they just gave you the money, and then you give them a platform, it really undermines the speeches and the panels. So,
well, I think this is a balancing act that I think all political nonprofits struggle with. Obviously, you need donors. You can't live. You're a nonprofit.
Right.
But donors tend to want to weigh in, and some donors are more politically savvy than other donors.
The other thing that happens here is it used to be if you went to a conference that sucked, you told your friends about it 2 weeks later when you saw them, Now, these bloggers are live tweeting this stuff. They're posting blogs in real time. They're tweeting it out to their friends. And so basically you have a situation where, if something goes bad, I'm opening my window here, letting some light in. If something goes bad, everybody knows it. And right. It creates a really weird sort of situation, and it's just...
It seems like everything I've heard out of the conservative movement since election day 2008 was we need to do more new media. The left is killing us on new media. We need to embrace Twitter and Facebook and blogging and be more creative about it. To some degree, I thought it was almost an overlearning that if we just show up on Twitter, magically the country will swing to our way of thinking, when obviously you have to use these tools in more of a savvy way for them to have an impact. But is there actually a debate within the conservative movement how useful these tools are?
Well, no, except this one guy who thinks blast faxing is the way to go. No, there really isn't, but I think that there's a generational divide. And that sort of leads into the thing that I'll segue into next, which also happened at Western CPAC. There's a generational divide where these sort of self-appointed movement conservative leaders, people who, moved to D.C. and set up think tanks and organizations, typically in the 70s and 80s, a lot of the younger people now, the bloggers, don't really have a reverence or a respect for them. In some cases, that's bad because these guys and gals, like Phyllis Schlafly, for example, it was not the cool, popular thing to do in 1970 to become a conservative, So, it's not like they were doing it at the time to get rich, but I don't know who said it, but there's a saying that everything that starts out as a movement, it turns into a business and it deteriorates into a racket. And so there are some people now who are either out of touch, or there's people who are not sincere in their beliefs and who would just do this to make money. But in any event, like, for example, I work for Morton Blackwell, one of the founders of the conservative movement. I worked for him at the Leadership Institute for many years. So I actually have a deep, abiding respect for him. He's a great man, and for people like Paul Weyrich and the conservative movement leaders, who I think were, by and large, very good people. And not all of their predecessors have been. But a lot of my colleagues don't. They don't have that because they don't live in D.C. They live somewhere else. They never worked for a conservative think tank or organization. And they just started a blog and somehow got popular. And so, and there's good and bad things about that. But in any event, the
movement's getting decentralized.
Yeah, it really is. And so that we sort of saw part of that this weekend. David Keene, who's the head of the American Conservative Union, a few months ago was involved in this scandal that was in Politico, where he was accused of pay-to-play activity involving ACU's support of UPS over FedEx. I won't go into it too much, but we'll put a link up to it. But anyway, this guy...
They're being accused of whoring themselves out to the highest corporate bidder.
Exactly. Like, if you give ACU money, then David Keene will write a column favorable to your organization. It was basically selling his column, was the accusation. He has a column, I guess, for Roll Call or The Hill or something. But in any event, this guy, John Ziegler, who I would describe as the Michael Moore of the right, he set up an interview with Keene, And the first 5 minutes, and by the way, I recommend watching it. I think it's on, Ziegler wrote about it and put up video at Mediaite, and Ed Morrissey put up video at Hot Air. It's kind of, it'll make you cringe to watch this video, because it starts off as a normal interview, and then it becomes accusations, and Keene wants to end the interview, and Ziegler won't let him. At one point, Ziegler holds up a $20 bill, and jokingly, and this is public by now, this has become a big scene, right? Everybody's watching, and Keene tells him he wants to kick his ass or something, and Ziegler holds up a $20 bill and says, "Hey, David, will you write something good about Sarah Palin if I give you this $20?" Because Keene had been critical of Sarah Palin, and Ziegler loves her. Anyway, so long story short, this was an explosion on the conservative blogosphere. Caleb Howe wrote about it at Red State. Infidels are cool. Actually, I'm sorry.
It's striking to me that it seems like in the early part of the year, the conservative movement was a little on their heels, not hitting their targets, not as unified as they've historically been. They kind of caught some fire in August with the town hall strategy that seemed to culminate in the Tea Party 9/12 rally.
Yeah.
And then since then, Obama went on his PR blitz, and it seems like he got the initiative back on healthcare. You haven't heard as much. Conservatives have not had as much luck derailing the process since that rally. And now you're having this conference last week where it's a lot of circular firing squad, which is usually a hallmark of the left.
Yeah, it's
and it doesn't seem to be dealing with the big issues of the moment.
It's not. It's ridiculous. And I mean, look, and by the way, there is. Well, let me finish by saying Ziegler was the thing ended with him being escorted out by the police. Basically, he was supposed to speak on a panel. They canceled that. He was escorted out by security. The police had been called at one point. The video is fantastic. I recommend everybody watching it. It's cringe inducing, but no, you're right. I mean, and I think this guy Ziegler is really sort of. It's just, it's the whole P.T. Barnum showmanship thing. It's funny because conservative bloggers are divided over him. Ed Morrissey, and it seems like the divide is between journalists and activist bloggers, or bloggers and journalists. So like Quinn Hillier and Philip Klein, who are reporters by trade, and at American Spectator and Weekly or DC Examiner and stuff like that. They think that John Ziegler is a Michael Moore-esque, just showman kind of, I don't know, basically Michael Moore. And then, but it seems like you've got people like Ed Morrissey and Caleb Howe who both think it's great what he did. I think the guy is a jerk, personally. I don't necessarily want him sticking a camera in my face, but look, if anybody could make me feel sorry and like David Keene, it was this video. I mean, and it's just, if someone ends an interview, it's over. You can ask tough questions, but this guy would not stop the interview. I don't think it's helpful for the movement, but it was certainly talked about. If the purpose of our show is to talk about what conservative bloggers or liberal bloggers are talking about, this was certainly something conservative bloggers were all about this week. So,
should we move on to next topic?
I think we shall. Maybe something. Maybe
you
something.
Seem so sad now. I almost wanted to end this whole thing.
Well, we'll go to something that's a little bit less inside baseball and a little bit more pertinent to the national debate. I think that the last story actually will be important as it affects the conservative movement going forward. But it's probably not going to be in the New York Times, whereas this other stuff might be. Well,
on the left, the Progressive Campaign Change Committee, I think I'm spelling that right, they, blogger-fueled PAC, I think they're a PAC, they have been running ads promoting public option, throughout this whole debate, and generally pretty provocative ads that get attention. They've now done 2 ads running in Nevada going at Harry Reid, The first one featuring a local, question whether Harry Reid is strong enough of a leader to get a public option passed. Actually, the second thing might not actually be an ad just yet, but they commissioned a poll where they asked Nevada voters, is Harry Reid a weak leader, and got a majority response saying that he was. So there's this pressure being put upon Reid, and anecdotally you hear it all the time from folks in the progressive liberal grassroots, disaffection with Reid, disaffection with Pelosi. Why can't they get things passed? They have these majorities. They are the face of the congressional caucuses, and they take the brunt when those caucuses are ideologically divided. I'm always more sympathetic to the leadership there, because I know that it's not them as individuals that are the problem. They have these ideologically diverse caucuses that are hard to corral, but they always take the brunt. And PCCC is definitely driving them, putting additional pressure on Reid as he is trying to craft a final health care bill, bringing together the Finance Committee and the Health Committee versions, one that has public option and one does not. But on my DD, Josh Orden raised a cautionary flag, saying, "Hey, I want to pressure these guys as much as the next liberal blogger, but it's really helpful to put forth inject a narrative that Reid is currently weak. Is that taking this strategy too far, to the point where you're really damaging his electoral prospects, and is already going to be seemingly a very contested reelection race for Reid in 2010, according to the early polls?" Now, Josh may be an outlier blogger voice in that, but it's hard to know sometimes. There's definitely a sense, I think, in the bulk of the blogosphere that you want to be as aggressive as possible and put maximum pressure on leadership. But Josh raises a question whether there are some bloggers out there that say, you know what, you can have a little bit more finesse with the stuff and not do things that might bite you later on. When you look at that, Matt, do you rub your hands with glee that the circular firing squad is on the left as well as the right?
Yeah, I do. I tell you, because I think that Harry Reid is in serious trouble. And if I were a liberal, I would not do this. I would look the other way, or not look the other way, but I would find a different way to try to use leverage against him. Because I tell you what, he's in real trouble. The last polling I saw, there's 2 Republicans running against him, and they're both beating him. And the narrative that he's weak, I hate to break this to you, Bill, they're not starting that narrative. He screams that narrative. And I know he was a boxer, but he's like the wimpiest boxer since Jerry Cooney. I mean, the guy really comes across as weak. like that's, would they think that George H.W. Bush, remember he had that whole thing about being a wimp? Some people just have that about them. And I'm not sure what it is, but Harry Reid, it's not a good thing. And I think that it's very dangerous. And I can't think of anything. I can't think of an analogy of this happening to anybody else in a similar situation. I mean, certainly Daschle didn't have to fight off his own party, I don't think, even though he was very supportive.
Trent Lott got overthrown.
Yeah, but he wasn't in a tough reelect.
No, not a tough reelect.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. Where
but there was a sense on the right that he was weak as far as conservative priorities were concerned.
Right, but I think the problem is that when you say weak and you run ads saying Harry Reid's weak, people don't think he's weak because he's not committed to the public option. People think he's weak because he's a wimp. And I'm not saying that's right or that that's the intent, but
that's the risk.
That is the risk, and I think it's a very real risk. I think it's very dangerous, and I can't think of a situation. I mean, clearly McCain in the primary was under a lot of attack from conservatives about immigration, but not when he won the general so much. Republicans overthrew what was it, Daschle? Tom Daschle, right?
Mm-hmm.
In South Dakota.
Yeah.
But I don't think, refresh my memory, that was 2004.
Well, he lost
that was 2004,
his race,
right?
I think it was 2004.
But he wasn't under attack from the left at that point, was he, as well? I wouldn't think so.
No, not like this.
Yeah.
The blogosphere was, really in its infancy at that point. I think there was a sense with Daschle in the liberal blogosphere that, it's a bad idea to have red state Democrats take majority leader or congressional leadership positions because they have to do that kind of dance a lot. So they can't be effective partisan advocates, which is what you want in a leadership position. And that's why you had a big push to have Nancy Pelosi be Speaker or I think Minority Leader first in 2005, saying let's quit this trying to put our red state people up front because there's a lot of pitfalls with that. You want to have a broad majority, but just not in leadership positions when they can muddle your party's message. But I think you found. This is my argument. Pelosi gets many of the same knocks now that Reid does. Reid may get it more because he has to deal with the even more complex caucus than Pelosi does. But Pelosi gets those knocks too, even though she's in as liberal a district as can be. It's just the difficulties of governing when you have broad majorities.
Yeah, and you make an interesting point about red state Democrats being the leader. Interesting. Yeah, clearly it is not, the reverse has not happened for Republicans in a long time, right? We've had Speaker Gingrich from Georgia.
Well, ever since Gingrich, you had, Bob Michael.
Bob Michael, right? So that's like 93.
Before Gingrich. And Gingrich advanced the notion you don't want to have these mealy-mouthed, wussy moderates leading your party and cutting all these deals with Democrats. That is the wrong way to be in the minority. And Gingrich sort of patented
Dick Armey
the more
from
aggressive
Texas.
Minority stance and became Speaker because of it.
Tom DeLay, Dick Armey from Texas in the House.
Right.
That's an interesting point. And yet Democrats were, in many ways, the opposite. So, very, very interesting.
The other big blog story, I think, this week was the firestorm that the authors of SuperFreakonomics faced over the last several days. The authors, Dubner and Levitt, one's an economist, one's a journalist.
Were these the same guys who did the first Freakonomics book?
Yes,
okay.
Yes. And that huge bestseller,
right.
4 million copies, led them to have a New York Times blog. And they've sort of really, petted their own, contrarian economist style, finding all these counterintuitive ways to slice and dice studies and statistics. And they developed a big following. So this is their follow-up book.
And they had a blog at the New York Times. They had a blog at the New York Times, right?
They still do.
They still do.
So one of the chapters in the latest book goes at environmentalists saying that carbon is not the global warming problem. It's the warming itself. It's that carbon's not the villain. You shouldn't be trying to cut carbon emissions. And then they advance this whole very controversial notion of geoengineering, where you blast the atmosphere with, I believe, sulfur dioxide to cool the planet. And in the course of making this argument, a slew of environmental and economic bloggers have found that they misrepresented and misquoted various economists and environmental studies. Joe Rahm, the most prominent of these folks, he blogs at Climate Progress. He's a former Clinton administration official and has been cited as one of the most influential, environmentalists in the country now. He went on a rampage against these guys. It launched several dozen other blog posts from big names like Paul Krugman, who blogs at the New York Times as well. Brad DeLong, another economic blogger, Ezra Klein, Matt Iglesias. If you go to EnviroKnow, there's a long list of all the folks that have piled on them. And at first, the Freakonomics guys try to slough it off and sort of treat Rahm like I think they even give a quote saying, "Yeah, this was one crazy blogger." But now I've realized they have to respond in a more forceful way. So they're responding on their Freakonomics blog, but they're not really, going at all the criticisms. They're trying to focus on Rahm. They're still trying to dismiss him as a blogger, not recognizing his pedigree.
Right. And this has made it onto the more mainstream, not environmental blogs too. Didn't I see this at TPM or someplace like that?
I would imagine. I think it has gravitated beyond the more niche blogs at this point. Although I haven't seen it quite break into broader media. I did see there was a Slate post at their big money section. I was also very critical of the Freakonomics authors that said, I can't believe this guy got NPR and repeated this notion that carbon is not the problem when it's demonstrably is the problem. And if you go to the NPR transcript of the interview that they did, not only the guy wasn't challenged when he said that, but then they had an addendum to the piece saying, "Oh, it turns out that all these people, all these scientists are upset."
So maybe
we'll have the guy on again and debate the issue at the Union of Concerned Scientists.
But are the people that he quoted, are they also disputing?
Was one guy in particular, I think his last name is Candera, if I'm pronouncing it correctly, where they paraphrase him saying that carbon is not the villain, and it's now on his website that carbon is the villain. So he's been the one who's been most caught up in what did this guy really say, and that's probably one of the most egregious charges that they've had to face. But from so to avoid you and I having a global warming debate over this subject, I think the interesting blogger media story is you have two sets of Times bloggers.
Right.
You have the Freakonomics bloggers at the Times site. You have Paul Krugman on his Times blog. Not just having a difference of opinion, but having a debate over what the facts are. And I've yet to see the Times acknowledge this. I mean, you can. This is the difficulty in the media having blogs. Blogs, by definition, don't have editors.
Right.
But your media site, supposedly you are true to the facts. If there's a factual dispute, I think you got to arbitrate that and chastise one of your bloggers and say, "Hey, you can't say things that are factually untrue."
I don't know about that. I think that the problem is that there's a difference of opinion between what's factually true. I mean, am I correct? The Freakonomics people are standing by it.
Oh, they're totally standing by it. Although one of the guys they cite is this Microsoft executive who is a big geoengineering proponent, and at the end of he did a defense on the Freakonomics blog as a guest poster. And at the end of the post, he's saying, what's wrong with saying geoengineering is a last resort if cutting carbon doesn't work? This is the opposite argument that the book makes. The book argues that cutting carbon you should not try at all, and you should go straight to the geoengineering, and they treat it like it's sort of this lickety-split, we know it's going to work thing, when it's this highly controversial, barely tested, theory.
Well, what I've seen work or done, say like the Washington Post, is if they have a columnist that they think has written something, they will just have the ombudsman,
right,
sound off on it and say, there's been a dispute between George Will and, Kathleen Parker or whatever over this issue. And the ombudsman essentially writes an editorial stating what they believe the fact to be. So maybe that's the solution. But I just hate to get into the point of stifling debate and dissension. I think it's pretty healthy to have these conversations. And a lot of times, that people think
there's these two separent blogs at the Times.
Yeah,
living in separate worlds, and it's not coming together at all on the site. I think if they had a fuller discussion, maybe they would get to the eventual truth.
Yeah, so you're saying they're sort of having a conversation, right, with each other?
Not really. I really think it's happening on totally independent tracks. Essentially the Freakonomics guys are, plenty of bloggers do this. It's one of the difficulties of, or the drawbacks of blogging, is when you're writing your own post, you can very easily cherry pick which arguments you want to address and not address the ones that are the toughest to deal with. And I think it's what the Freakonomics guys are doing right now. And, and Joe Rahm's having a field day calling these guys out and showing how they're contradicting themselves at this point.
Now, these guys, correct me if I'm wrong, these guys were pretty well liked and respected.
Oh, absolutely. I think it's a huge strategic misstep for them. I mean, now, Chris Mooney blogged at The Intersection that, look, SuperFreakonomics is number 8 on Amazon. Who is this hurting?
Right.
Is this just another great controversy that's going to fuel book sales?
Well, it's like the war on Fox. I mean, the war on Fox.
There's always those arguments. But I think in both cases, actually, SuperFreakonomics was going to be a big seller regardless, probably.
Right.
Because these guys have a good track record and a following. But I think their reputation took a real hit. Because it's not just one guy that dinged them. It launched, a series of prominent people saying, well, you just got stuff factually wrong and you misquoted people. That's going to take some shine off of them to the point where if they now do future interviews, this controversy is always going to come up, which I think was the White House's strategy versus Fox. Fox already gets good ratings. Fox was already successfully driving stories that the White House did not think deserved to be given big spotlights. But just as the right has tried to make every step that Obama takes be seen in a polarizing light, he can't go speak to a high school that it being seen as some sort of a debated controversy. The White House wants to just say to Fox, so when Fox pushes a scandal line, people take a breath and say, hey, wait a second, maybe it's one of these big controversies. I don't want to just jump on that bandwagon right away. And same with SuperFreakonomics now. I think as they go forward, the more the story gets pushed by bloggers into broader media, the more they have to deal with it at every stop, and now their reputation is not as shiny.
It's an asterisk beside their name forever.
It's Roger Maris.
Yeah, exactly. I would say more Barry Bonds. But no, I remember conservatives were the ones who had the biggest problem, I think, with the first book. Because the first book made an argument, and I recall there was a lot of pushback on its authenticity, but they made the argument that because abortion became legal in 1973, crime went down in the 90s.
I think there were a lot of liberals that didn't care for that argument either.
Yeah, we won't debate it here, but a lot of conservatives were not very happy about it, and there was pushback about the validity of that argument, not just whether or not it was nice to say, but the validity of it. So it's interesting.
This is sort of the trap you get into when you sort of treat contrarianism as an ideology. And you're constantly trying, I think Ezra Klein was sort of making this point, they're trying to find they're so enamored with being contrarian because that's their brand, Freakonomics brand. You can lose sight of what the facts are, which is always the attack on ideologues, that you're so blind that you don't look at the facts. Contrarianism can be just as much of a blind ideology as anything else.
Absolutely. And, it's almost like the balloon boy. When you really want to be famous and you're willing to do anything to get your name out there, it's a fine line between being a marketing genius and putting your son in a hot air balloon or whatever, or so same sort of thing. I mean, when you're desperate to write this fascinating book and break new ground with it, then you put yourself at risk for kind of overreaching on it. By the way, I'm not sure what happened to my lighting for those of you watching, but
my light's got
really
dark,
bad.
I think just the sun's going down.
No, it happened very suddenly. There's not a the sun did not all of a sudden go down there. So,
can I do a quick plug before we sign off?
You may as soon as I plug the Facebook page, facebook.com/theweekendblog, and follow us on Twitter /theweekendblog.
Also on Thursday, October 29th, a big conference in Washington, D.C., put up by my group, Institute for America's Future, and the Alliance for American Manufacturing, Making It in America, Building the New Economy. How do we end the bubble economy of speculation and debt and start revitalizing 21st century manufacturing. There'll be Senator Sherrod Brown, AFL-CIO President Richard Trumka, Steelworkers President Leo Gerard, Governor Ed Rendell, and all other folks. Free conference in D.C. Find out more at ourfuture.org.
Awesome, man. Good seeing you. You're out next week, right?
I got to deal with this conference, so I won't be here next week.
All right. Have a good one.
But I'm sure there'll be someone else with good lighting and a better kept beard than me to spar with you.
All right, man. Catch you later.